The time is just gone.
لبيك اللهم لبيك لبيك لا شريك لك لبيك إن الحمد والنعمة لك الملك لا شريك لك لبيك اللهم لبيك لبيك لا شريك لك لبيك إن الحمد والنعمة لك الملك لا شريك لك لبيك اللهم لبيك لبيك لا شريك لك لبيك.
The time is just gone, 10 minutes to 7 p.m. as we continue with our Hajj broadcast this evening. And we're going across now to be joined by Muhammed Nur Nordien. Now, Muhammed Nur has spent many years in Saudi Arabia as a student in Mecca and Medina. And I recall talking to him years ago. As a young boy, he used to even be a scout on the days of Hajj, providing assistance to Hujjaj. And also, he's noticed, obviously, Hajj over the years, how Hajj has evolved, how Hajj has actually changed, even from a logistical perspective. Now, we've seen so much over the years happen, so much in terms of changes. And with COVID-19, we've seen the changes in the last 2 years, and going forward, Allah knows best what this impact is going to make on the Hujjaj as we go forward. And we're joined on the line right now by Muhammed Nur Nordien. Muhammad Nur, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Inayat, Jazakallah khair. It's always good being with you and and engaging with the listeners. MashaAllah, barakallah.
Well, you and I have had we've had so much in terms of engagements in the past, particularly looking at Hajj. And I recall the times where we did the Arafah khutbah together. We did the translation of the Arafah khutbah as well, but also just discussing Hajj in general. Now, you're not that young man anymore, not that you're an old guy, but I know as a youngster, as someone who had been studying in Saudi Arabia, and you've had, exposure to a lot as a young person, to the point that even during Hajj, you were a scout in Hajj, providing some sort of assistance to Hujjaj. So just take us through some of the experiences you've had, and also some of the things that basically stand out for you, and looking at Hajj then and how it has evolved over a period of time.
Jazakallah khair, Inayat, for calling on me. It's always good to to engage with the listeners, and these auspicious days and moments of Hajj. Allah Ta'ala, bless us all with His forgiveness and His mercy. These days of the 10 days of the Hijjah. Inayat, a very interesting statistic. I don't have the exact date, but up till the 50s and the 60s, there was not more than 100,000 Hujjaj. Can you believe that? And they hit the first million around somewhere in the mid-70s, like 75, 78, maybe even as late as 79, 80, was the first time there was 1 million people. And the interesting thing is how Hajj naturally, of course, will develop with technological developments. I have in my cupboard here, I took it out yesterday, I have a pair of khuf that my grandfather used when he went for Hajj. In the 40s, he went for Hajj. And I still have those khuf here. And he went with a steamboat, and they used to go via Mombasa and Bombay and so forth, And then the first million happens around the late 70s, 80s. And remember, and in the 50s, it barely hits 100,000, etc. So if you see how transportation, namely air flight, became cheaper, more accessible, and you hit up into the 90s, the 80s, the 90s, early 2000s, air transportation becomes much more accessible, development of international trade routes, airline routes, and so you hit numbers 2.5 million, etc. On the ground, of course, in a place like Mecca, the space doesn't get any bigger. The accommodations don't naturally just grow, and so Makkah al-Mukarramah since the late 90s, the early 90s, it has seen large expansions of the Masjid al-Haram. The Masjid al-Haram stayed almost the same until around the early 90s, and then from the 90s we saw the King Fahd expansion, then the King Abdullah expansion, and it's just been a huge construction site since then. And even interesting things. I mean, we've been in broadcasting for over 20 years. Almost 20 years now. And when we first started out, I remember in the 2008, 2007, that was one of the first times that CNN and BBC actually had substantial coverage of Hajj. It was probably when Al Jazeera came around. So again, satellite TV, the mentality of editors, of producers, of people in media who especially in global media, who gave more space to following the Hajj. Those are all very interesting developments, And today, you switch on channels. Let's forget about the Twitter and so forth. But today, there's a channel that follows Makkah 24 hours, the Haram 24 hours, follows in Medina 24 hours. All these lectures and talks that happen in the Haram in Makkah and the Haram in Medina, you can find them online, etc. So it's interesting how that environment, as an environment, has just become so more accessible. And yes, if you look at it another from a safety and security perspective, if you look at what policing and crowd management looked like in the 80s and what it looked like in the 90s, and the infrastructure that has been developed, so everything has changed. But what has not changed, it's the objective, it's the ibadah, it's this continued, a movement of Hajj of 1,400 years, and before the son of Ibrahim alayhi salatu, it hasn't changed. So as much as everything has changed, a lot of it, or most of it, the most important part of what it is at essence, it hasn't changed. I saw that the Saudi, the presidents of the two harams, yesterday or a few days ago, they announced the Imam and Khatib of Arafah tomorrow, Sheikh Belida. There was a time when Sheikh Abdul Aziz al-Sheikh, Hafidhullah, he was the Imam and Khatib since I know myself. That thing never changed. For 30 years, I don't know how many, that thing never changed. And over the last 4 years, we've seen it change. There are different ulama, different scholars, younger, etc., even in the haram. So a lot has changed, even in the way which some of the more, what I would call more set disciplines of the Hajj, like the khutbah, Arafah, and so forth. That's finally changing. You get different voice after all these years, But the Hajj hasn't changed. Unfortunately, we're in a position now, COVID and the restrictions, and the Saudi government have tried their best to accommodate and to ensure, of course, that Hajj continues. And again, it's because of advancements in technology. The Saudi government have invested billions over the last 5 years, it's constantly investing, if anyone went for Hajj in the 80s, 90s, what the Jamarat looked like to now a 7, 8, 9-story bridge, etc. So all of this, and the learnings that have come from there. The Saudi government have various research institutes, Qura University, the Ministry of Interior, and they look at everything from signage to water quality to planning to aircon to air pollution to amazing things. And we see the benefit of that in how easier Hajj has become. Of course, there's always hiccups, etc. But it's very interesting to see, alhamdulillah, in my short lifetime, the type of developments and changes that I have witnessed. There's a train that takes people through the Mashair now. It was something unheard of, imaginable up to 15 years ago. So within a space of 3-4 years, someone decides we're going to put a train, make it easier. The train starts running, boom, and there you go. So it shows, and you can only imagine what it would look like in the next 10 years or so. Allahu A'lam. It's been a very interesting journey over the years to watch the developments.
Well, I was just talking to the Malaysian Hajj Mission, and obviously they are a government, they are a statutory body that is formed by the Act of Parliament. And he was talking about, obviously, looking at Hajj where we are at this point in time. And there is all this talk about Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia, and the plan, obviously, is to increase the numbers a lot more. Now we're talking of about 2 million people. Obviously, before the COVID era, we were looking at about 2 million, 2.5 million people coming for Hajj. But that number is actually expected to double. And we look at Vision 2030, possibly in about 8 or 9 years' time. So, with all these plans in place and with this vision in mind to increase the numbers, and I would expect that, there would be a lot more changes. But as you mentioned, that Okay, the Haram, we've seen the expansion of the Haram over a period of time to accommodate a lot more people. But when we look at now, tomorrow, the Hujjaj are going to Arafah. When you're looking at Mina can only take so many people. Arafah can only take so many people. And it'll be interesting to see, in line with this vision, what are we going to see? Are we going to see further changes from a logistics point of view, from a planning point of view, from an execution point of view as well, Muhammad Nur?
If you follow the whole Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia, it's a very interesting vision. I don't like to use the following word. It's a peeve hate, but holistic. It's a holistic view at the whole Saudi environment, and at the bottom, or the foundation of this Vision 2030 sits education. In 2011, 12, 13, there were about 100,000 Saudi students in the United States alone. If you go to any board in Saudi, any board, or any regulatory authority board, research board, if you go into government department, from director upwards, etc. levels, people only have PhDs. If you go into the parliament, if you go into the Saudi cabinet, you only find people with PhDs. And so the Saudis have ensured over the last 10, 15, 20 years, large investment in education. And this has led to leaps and leaps in technological advancement, in actually being capable to develop the Vision 2030. And Vision 2030 basically says, and I'm trying to sell it, I'm just trying to say how it works. Vision 2030 says that we depended on oil, and now we need to get other resources, finance, real estate, etc., etc. So therefore, when you look at Hajj is then the whole Hajj system is a benefactor of all of these advancements, developments, financial input, infrastructure development that's happening within the whole of Saudi Arabia. That, of course, will generate a lot of that technological advancement and the knowledge transfer to the development and the organization and the investment in Hajj. Automation is a big part of Vision 2030. 4IR is a big part of 2030. And if you look at Hajj today, the amount of automation that's going in it, the visas, the transportation, the identification, the logistics, there's going to be a lot of 4IR. So, and with that, technological advancements in construction, I'm sure, like we just said, 20, 25 years ago, Jamarat was one little road, and then they made one little bridge. I remember when they built that bridge in the late 80s, early 90s, that was the real deal, And now it's a 9-story, 7-story bridge or something. So it shows you that there's always room for development. And most importantly, the environment has become safer. The environment has become more regulated. And there's, of course, talks of privatization. So it's the Saudis government is also talking about, and people don't like this word of commercial, but when you make Hajj, for the lack of a better word, more commercial, you, in the correct environment, you make it more competitive. You make more options, and these are all things which are being studied and discussed, etc., etc. So the commercialization of Hajj doesn't necessarily mean it's cheap. It could make it more affordable. It could give people more options. It could give people so many benefits. But at the end of the day, the Vision 2030 is a national vision, and no doubt that Hajj, the Hajj as an event and Mecca as a city will definitely benefit from all of the input and everything that's gone into the development of Vision 2030 in Saudi.
Well, Muhammed Nur, Jazakallah khairan so much for that and for your time with us this evening here on Salam Media. All the best to you, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.